Secret. Yeah. Orchestral maneuvers in the dark. It live from 1985. I believe that the music's that old. It's only half my age. Morning, Mel.
Morning, Lenny. I don't know if you're aware, but you're breaking up quite a bit in Discord.
I can't help Discord as long as it's going over the okay, and I'm as it is. I can't read in progress, so let's just hope you're picking up as you read. But what's on the from Manley P?
Okay. Well, today it's we're continuing. We're just going to finish off the last few paragraphs of the section we were reading before, which was entitled "The Table of the 10 Numbers." And then we're going on to the next section, which is called The Human Body in Symbolism. For those of you who are in Discord, I will post a link now into the appropriate text channel for you to follow along using the text. For those of you who are listening, this text can be found on a website called www.sacred-text, that's texts.com, and then simply look for Manley P. Hall's The Secret Teachings of All Ages. And if you find it, we're starting today at the very end of on the index. It's called, the section is called Pythagorean Pythagorean Mathematics, and it's page 69 of this digitally transcribed text. For those of you who aren't aware, this text was published, I believe, if I remember correctly, it was 1923. It was definitely in the 1920s. And the text is not copyrighted, although later covers, etc. are, but the actual text is not. Okay, so without further ado, I should just continue on from where we left off last week. So we're on number 9. Number 9 of 10 in the table of the 10 numbers. So it says the Ennead, that is spelt E-N-N-E-A-D, which is number 9, was the first square of an odd number, in brackets 3 times 3. It was associated with failure and shortcoming, because it fell short of the perfect number 10 by 1. It was called the number of man because of the 9 months of his embryonic life. Among its key words are ocean and horizon, because to the ancients these were boundless. The Ennead is the limitless number, because there is nothing beyond it but the infinite 10. It was called boundary and limitation, because it gathered all numbers within itself. It was called the sphere of the air, because it surrounded the numbers as air surrounds the earth. Among the gods and goddesses who partook in greater or less degree of its nature were Prometheus, Vulcan, Juno, the sister and wife of Jupiter, Paean and Aglaea, Tritogenia, Curetes, Proserpine, Hyperion, and Terpsichore, who is a muse. The 9 was looked upon as evil because it was an inverted 6. According to the Eleusinian mysteries, it was the number of the spheres through which the consciousness passed on its way to birth. Because of its close resemblance to the spermatozoan, the 9 has been associated with germinal life. The decad, 10, according to the Pythagoreans, is the greatest of numbers, not only because it is the tetractys, in brackets the 10 dots, but because it comprehends all arithmetic and harmonic proportions. Pythagoras said that 10 is the nature of number, because all nations reckon to it, and when they arrive at it, they return to the monad. The decad was called both heaven and the world, because the former includes the latter. Being a perfect number, the decad was applied by the Pythagoreans to those things relating to age, power, faith, necessity, and the power of memory. It was also called unwearied, because, like God, it was tireless. The Pythagoreans divided the heavenly bodies into 10 orders. They also stated that the decad perfected all numbers and comprehended within itself the nature of odd and even, moved and unmoved, good and ill. They associated its power with the following deities: Atlas, for it carried the numbers on its shoulders; Urania, Mnemosyne, the sun; Thanes, and the one God. The decimal system can probably be traced back to the time when it was customary to reckon on the fingers, these being among the most primitive of calculating devices and still in use among many Aboriginal peoples. Okay, so that's the end of the mathematics section, and we now go on to the human body in symbolism. But before I start
Wait. I have some comments on the number system to make.
Excellent. I was just about to suggest, does anybody have comments?
Yeah, it's funny because as soon as you started with the number 9, my mind went into the Beatles. Number 9, number 9, number 9. And the stuff that we're learning today with Marco Rodin, 3, 6, and 9, are incredibly important numbers. I also wonder if the counting system based on base 10 is actually something that's holding us back, and that if this isn't the way he presents it as secret knowledge, so that behind the knowledge of the numbers that we work with in the mathematics system, there is a occult reason for having that system imposed. And that as I look at the Fibonacci sequence and the way that numbers work, the whole base 10 is an imposition, and the number 10 really isn't even a number. It's composed of a 1 and a 0, and there's some people who don't even consider the 0 to be a number either. And so I'm just amazed at the way that in the first bit of this reading from Manley, it took us from the occult into something that almost hides what I think is really going on. And if you think about it, if stuff is presented straightforward is not quite correct, and then the stuff that is quite correct is presented to be misleading and is not correct at all, I can understand why I've come to the conclusion that we're working from bad base information, and that we almost have to rediscover everything we know by looking deeper into it and weighing it again. So in a way, the new way is somewhat because of Manley Hall and the secret teachings of all ages.
But it wouldn't surprise me at all what you're saying. I think I've heard similar ideas from others that it definitely holds us back. That it would be better to go back to or create a better system.
Well, you see, there is one that nature uses already based on Fibonacci, the golden mean ratio, sacred geometry, and all that. And Pythagorean geometry is the basis of mathematics, and mathematics doesn't accept sacred geometry as valid because the valid is criteria of proof. And in geometry, especially Pythagorean geometry and Euclidean geometry, if you don't have proof, it's not true. But in the real world, if we went through with, if we don't have proof, it's not, we would have clean blank minds because most of what we believe is not true. And the proof that it is true is based on predicates that aren't true in and of themselves. So I think that Manley Holland pointing out what's a cult 100 years ago is also reinforcing our belief system of this current time, which is not necessarily the belief system that we should really be believing, because belief systems are extremely limited in forcing us into narrow channels.
Absolutely. So, do you have anything more to add, Lenny, or does anybody else?
I think I'm good for now. And why don't you just start up on our next chapter?
Okay, then.
Read the title again.
The title of this chapter is The Human Body in Symbolism. The oldest, the most profound, the most universal of all symbols is the human body. The Greeks, Persians, Egyptians, and Hindus considered a philosophical analysis of man's triune nature to be an indispensable part of ethical and religious training. The mysteries of every nation taught that the laws, elements, and powers of the universe were epitomized in the human constitution, that everything which existed outside of man had its analogue within man. The universe, being immeasurable in its immensity and inconceivable in its profundity, was beyond mortal estimation. Even the gods themselves could comprehend but a part of the inaccessible glory which was their source. When temporarily permeated with divine enthusiasm, man may transcend, for a brief moment, the limitations of his own personality, and behold in part that celestial effulgence in which all creation is bathed. But even in his periods of greatest illumination, man is incapable of imprinting upon the substance of his rational soul a perfect image of the multiform expression of celestial activity. Recognizing the futility of attempting to cope intellectually with that which transcends the comprehension of the rational faculties, the early philosophers turned their attention from the inconceivable divinity to man himself. Within the narrow confines of his nature, they found manifested all the mysteries of the external spheres. As the natural outgrowth of this practice, there was fabricated a secret theological system in which God was considered as the grand man, and conversely, man as the little God. Continuing this analogy, the universe was regarded as a man, and conversely, man as a miniature universe. The greater universe was termed the macrocosm, the great world or body, and the divine life or spiritual entity controlling its functions was called the macroprosophus. I'll spell that: macroprosophus. Man's body, or the individual human universe, was termed the microcosm, and the divine life or spiritual entity controlling its functions was called the microprosophus. The pagan mysteries were primarily concerned with instructing neophytes in the true relationship existing between the macrocosm and the microcosm. In other words, between God and man. Accordingly, the key to these analogies between the organs and functions of the microcosmic man and those of the macrocosmic man constituted the most prized possession of the early initiates. In Isis Unveiled, H. P. Blavatsky summarizes the pagan concept of man as follows. Man is a little world, a microcosm inside the great universe. Like a fetus, he is suspended, by all his three spirits, in the matrix of the macrocosmos. And while his terrestrial body is in constant sympathy with its parent Earth, his astral soul lives in unison with the sidereal anima mundi. Anima mundi is spelt A-N-I-M-A and then M-U-N-D-I. He is in it as it is in him, for the world-pervading element fills all space and is space itself, only shoreless and infinite. As to his third spirit, the divine, what is it but an infinitesimal ray, one of the countless radiations proceeding directly from the highest cause, the spiritual light of the world? This is the trinity of organic and inorganic nature, the spiritual and the physical, which are three in one, and of which Proclus says that the first monad is the eternal God, the second, eternity, the third, the paradigm, or pattern of the universe, the three constituting the intelligible triad. Long before the introduction of idolatry into religion, the early priests caused the statue of a man to be placed in the sanctuary of the temple. This human figure symbolized the divine power in all its intricate manifestations. Thus, the priests of antiquity accepted man as their textbook, and through the study of him, learned to understand the greater and more abstruse mysteries of the celestial scheme of which they were a part. It was not improbable that this mysterious figure standing over the primitive altars was made in the nature of a mannequin, and, like certain emblematic hands in the mystery schools, was covered with either carved or painted hieroglyphs. The statue may have opened, thus showing the relative positions of the organs, bones, muscles, nerves, and other parts. After ages of research, the mannequin became a mass of intricate hieroglyphs and symbolic figures. Every part had its secret meaning. The measurements formed a basic standard by means of which it was possible to measure all parts of cosmos. It was a glorious composite emblem of all the knowledge possessed by the sages and hierophants. Then came the age of idolatry. The mysteries decayed from within. The secrets were lost, and none knew the identity of the mysterious man who stood over the altar. It was remembered only that the figure was a sacred and glorious symbol of the universal power, and it finally came to be looked upon as a god, the one in whose image man was made. Having lost the knowledge of the purpose for which the mannequin was originally constructed, the priests worshipped this effigy until at last their lack of spiritual understanding brought the temple down in ruins about their heads, and the statue crumbled with the civilization that had forgotten its meaning. Proceeding from this assumption of the first theologians that man is actually fashioned in the image of God, the initiated minds of past ages erected the stupendous structure of theology upon the foundation of the human body. The religious world of today is almost totally ignorant of the fact that the science of biology is the fountainhead of its doctrines and tenets. Many are the codes and laws believed by modern divines to have been direct revelations from divinity, are in reality the fruitage of ages of patient delving into the intricacies of the human constitution and the infinite wonders revealed by such a study. In nearly all the sacred books of the world can be traced an anatomical analogy. This is most evident in their creation myths. Anyone familiar with embryology and obstetrics will have no difficulty in recognizing the basis of the allegory concerning Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden, the 9 degrees of the Eleusinian mysteries, and the Brahmanic legend of Vishnu's incarnations. The story of the universal egg, the Scandinavian myth of Ginnungagap, I shall spell that, Ginnungagap, the dark cleft in space in which the seed of the world is sown, and the use of the fish as the emblem of the paternal generative power, all show the true origin of theological speculation. The philosophers of antiquity realized that man himself was the key to the riddle of life, for he was the living image of a divine plan. And in future ages, humanity also will come to realize more fully the solemn import of those ancient words, "The proper study of mankind is man." Both God and man have a twofold constitution, of which the superior part is invisible and the inferior visible. In both, there is also an intermediary sphere, marking the point where these visible and invisible natures meet. As the spiritual nature of God controls his objective universal form, which is actually a crystallized idea, so the spiritual nature of man is the invisible cause and controlling power of his visible material personality. Thus it is evident that the spirit of man bears the same relationship to his material body that God bears to the objective universe. The mysteries taught that spirit, or life, was anterior to form, and that what is anterior includes all that is posterior to itself. Spirit being anterior to form, form is therefore included within the realm of spirit. It is also a popular statement or belief that man's spirit is within his body. According to the conclusions of philosophy and theology, however, this belief is erroneous. For spirit first circumscribes an area and then manifests within it. Philosophically speaking, form, being a part of spirit, is within spirit. But spirit is more than the sum of form. As the material nature of man is therefore within the sum of spirit, so the universal nature, including the entire sidereal system, is within the all-pervading essence of God, the universal spirit. According to another concept of the ancient wisdom, all bodies, whether spiritual or material, have 3 centers, called by the Greeks the upper center, the middle center, and the lower center. An apparent ambiguity will here be noted. To diagram or symbolize adequately abstract mental verities is impossible, for the diagrammatic representation of one aspect of metaphysical relationships may be an actual contradiction of some other aspect. While that which is above is generally considered superior in dignity and power, in reality, that which is in the center is superior and anterior to both that which is said to be above and that which is said to be below. Therefore, it must be said that the first, which is considered as being above, is actually in the center, while both of the others, which are said to be either above or below, are actually beneath. This point can be further simplified if the reader will consider above as indicating degree of proximity to source, and below as indicating degree of distance from source. Source being posited in the actual center, and relative distance being the various points along the radii from the center toward the circumference. In matters pertaining to philosophy and theology, up may be considered as toward the center, and down as toward the circumference. Center is spirit, circumference is matter. Therefore, up is toward spirit along an ascending scale of spirituality. Down is toward matter, along an ascending scale of materiality. The latter concept is partly expressed by the apex of a cone, which, when viewed from above, is seen as a point in the exact centre of the circumference formed by the base of the cone. These three universal centres, the one above, the one below, and the link uniting them, represent three suns, or three aspects of one sun, centres of effulgence. These also have their analogues in the three grand centres of the human body, which, like the physical universe, is a demiurgic fabrication. The first of these suns, says Thomas Taylor, is analogous to light when viewed subsisting in its fountain, the sun. The second to the light immediately proceeding from the sun, and the third to the splendour communicated to other natures by this light. Since the superior or spiritual centre is in the midst of the other two, its analogue is the physical body. In the physical body is the heart, the most spiritual and mysterious organ in the human body. The second centre, or the link between the superior and inferior worlds, is elevated to the position of greatest physical dignity, the brain. The third, or lower centre, is relegated to the position of least physical dignity, but greatest physical importance, the generative system. Thus the heart is symbolically the source of life, the brain the link by which, through rational intelligence, life and form are united, and the generative system, or infernal creator, the source of that power by which physical organisms are produced. The ideals and aspirations of the individual depend largely upon which of these three centres of power predominates in scope and activity of expression. In the materialist, the lower centre is the strongest. In the intellectualist, the higher centre, but in the initiate, the middle centre. By bathing the two extremes in a flood of spiritual effulgence, controls wholesomely both the mind and the body. Okay, I'm just going to pause there a sec for anyone to comment. I just have to go and fetch something.
Okay, I can make comment.
Brilliant.
I find that what I'm hearing from Manley P. Hall here are some definitions that would have been nice to have, maybe 50 years ago when I was 10 years old. The definitions of above and below and up and down as being associated with spirit and matter were not really ways I ever looked at things because nobody ever bothered to point it out to me. And so some of this stuff that I hear coming from Manley Hall on some very, very basic definitions has been totally redefined by modern day science so that the words as defined by Manley don't have the same meaning as the words as developed by science today. And when I look at a transition in chemistry of an electron going from one state to another and creating a vibration by a movement of matter, I realize that that's the transfer of what Manley Hall is saying is up. And so when we start looking at this, which he also explains, the cone, which he also talks about, what he's doing is he's taking sacred geometry concepts and explaining them in mathematical terms. And now the mathematical terms are taught without the sacred geometry concepts behind it. So no wonder the world is dumbed down. The education system is built on redefinition of words to mean something other than what those words were used as to mean in the books that we read before modern times. So any of us who've gone back and read some of the older works and taken some impressions from them, better go back and check what those impressions were, because the words have been redefined in modern times.
Yes, I would agree. And what strikes me while reading this, which is quite exciting for me, is that when I first started meditating, and I would often have these intense visual experiences, at times when I wasn't even meditating. One of the ones that I had that I'll never forget matched what was being described here in terms of the structure of the universe, if you like, where you had a sphere, and the outer edges of the sphere, the circumference was the material world, and the center was source. And I actually would see sections of it like in a cone shape, pertaining to humanity and Gaia. And yeah, so it's very it's triggering the same kind of visuals that I remember having. It's interesting. And that's before I'd read or knew anything about this kind of thing.
In your knowledge base, have you ever known that the center of the circle was called up and the periphery of the circle towards the circumference was called down?
No, never. This is
That's a
the first I've
brand
heard of
new,
that.
yeah, that's a brand new definition to me. And I'm one of those people who prides themselves on knowing what the meaning of words are. And so for Manley P. Hall to tell me what up and down are defined as from before they created the university science system, I want my money back. Science, as I've been taught it by the universities, is a fabrication. I feel cheated by the education system. I want my money back.
I suppose it makes sense when you think about it, when you think about the Earth. So we are on the surface of the Earth, and we look up to the sky, but actually we're looking outward. We look down to the Earth and the center of the Earth, but actually we're looking inward. So in that respect, it does make sense now. But I wouldn't have really thought about that before.
But you see right there, they're telling us that what's out there further out in the sky is beyond matter and away from spirit. So as above, so below, you got to flip this around the other way. And what it's really telling me is that we're out there looking for aliens, and we're never going to find the what we should be doing is talking to our microbes. And if microbes, they're water-based, and I bet they're trying like heck to talk to us because they understand the chemistry a hell of a lot better than we do, because we understand it based on these frauds called biology and physics, which Manley Hall has done a great job of setting the basis for both of those in the stuff that he's reading. I'm very, very impressed. Not so much by Manley Hall, who I've always respected, but by how the point where we're listening to this makes so much sense in the topsy-turvy outside world that we've been given, because they've defined up and down in reverse of these definitions that were given by Manley Hall. It's funny also how when Franklin was coming up with electricity at the time of the Revolutionary War, which is all a myth, he got it backwards with his experiment with the kite, and because he got it backwards back at that time, there's massive confusion in system as to which electrons flow and what a positive charge is. So I'm way more aware of things because of this passage that we've been reading. It's really, really cool.
Mm. Yeah, and I'm thinking of this idea by some that the churches of switched things 180 that have got it the opposite. For example, the idea that heaven is above us and hell below us, you know, when it should be the other way around, or that heaven is within us and hell is without us. And this pervasive idea that many people have that we live in hell now, that heaven is within us. And the idea that if you go back to the mythology of the Sumerians, where Enki is represented as the snake, but was the savior of humankind, but demonized and made to be the opposite. And Enlil was the one who kept destroying, didn't want mankind and kept destroying him, but was deified as the god to worship. It's like everything is 180. It's the opposite way round than what we are taught to believe in many cases. At least that's what many people believe, or writings seem to indicate.
Yes. Yes. I wonder if you could go back and reread those definitions of above, below, up, down, and the other ones, just because I want to reinforce them one more time before we go on with the reading.
Sure. Okay. Let me find them. Okay. Okay, so I think this is probably a good place to start that, I think. Okay, according to another concept of the ancient wisdom, all bodies, whether spiritual or material, have three centers, called by the Greeks the upper center, the middle center, and the lower center. An apparent ambiguity will here be noted. To diagram or symbolize adequately abstract mental verities is impossible, for the diagrammatic representation of one aspect of metaphysical relationships may be an actual contradiction of some other aspect. While that which is above is generally considered superior in dignity and power, in reality that which is in the centre is superior and anterior to both that which is said to be above and that which is said to be below. Therefore, it must be said that the first, which is considered as being above, is actually in the centre, while both the others, which are said to be either above or below, are actually beneath. This point can be further simplified if the reader will consider above as indicating degree of proximity to source, and below as indicating degree of distance from source. Source being posited in the actual centre, and relative distance being the various points along the radii from the centre toward the circumference. In matters pertaining to philosophy and theology, up may be considered as toward the centre, and down as toward the circumference. Centre is spirit, circumference is matter. Therefore, up is toward spirit, along an ascending scale of spirituality. Down is toward matter, along an ascending scale of materiality. The latter concept is partly expressed by the apex of a cone, which, when viewed from above, is seen as a point in the exact centre of the circumference formed by the base of the cone. These three universal centres, the one above, the one below, and the link uniting them, represent three suns, or three aspects of one sun, centres of effulgence. These also have their analogues in the three grand centres of the human body, which, like the physical universe, is a demiurgic fabrication. The first of these suns, says Thomas Taylor, is analogous to light when viewed subsisting in its fountain, the sun. The second to the light immediately proceeding from the sun, and the third to the splendour communicated to other natures by this light. Since the superior or spiritual centre is in the midst of the other two, its analogue in the physical body is the heart, the most spiritual and mysterious organ in the human body. The second centre, or the link between the superior and inferior worlds, is elevated to the position of greatest physical dignity, the brain. The third, or lower centre, is relegated to the position of least physical dignity, but greatest physical importance, the generative system. Thus the heart is symbolically the source of life, the brain the link by which, through rational intelligence, life and form are united, and the generative system, or infernal creator, the source of that power by which physical organisms are produced. The ideals and aspirations of the individual depend largely upon which of these three centres of power predominates in scope and activity of expression. In the materialist, the lower centre is the strongest. In the intellectualist, the highest centre. But in the initiate, the middle centre. By bathing the two extremes in a flood of spiritual effulgence, controls wholesomely both the mind and the body. Okay, so that's the end of where I got to. Any more comments, Lenny, before I carry on, or anybody else?
No, okay to carry on by me.
Okay. I would say that that reminds me of the journey of life as depicted through the tarot. Or other sources I've read where children generally have their lower chakra centers most active, and as you age through life, your higher and higher chakras are activated through life. So, but I've heard before how the heart chakra combines both the upper chakras and the lower chakras together, and that somebody can achieve spiritual wisdom, if you like, or their crown chakra opening when the pineal chakra, I believe, and the lower chakras, as well as I think the heart, are in alignment, perpendicular alignment.
Are we working with an 8-chakra system?
That's working with the 7 chakra system that I've read.
Okay.
There. Okay.
So I look at the 8 chakras and the 7 chakras as being the same, with the difference being the recognition of an overall chakra. So numbers work in sacred geometry and they work in regular geometry, because the lowest unit of error in sacred geometry is plus or minus 1.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so what was I right? Okay, so as light bears witness of life, which is its source, so the mind bears witness of the spirit, and activity in a still lower plane bears witness of intelligence. Thus the mind bears witness of the heart, while the generative system in turn bears witness of the mind. Accordingly, the spiritual nature is most commonly symbolized by a heart, the intellectual power by an opened eye, symbolizing the pineal gland or cyclopean eye, which is the two-faced Janus of the pagan mysteries, and the generative system by a flower, a staff, a cup, or a hand. While all the mysteries recognize the heart as the center of spiritual consciousness, they often purposely ignored this concept and used the heart in its exoteric sense as the symbol of the emotional nature. In this arrangement, the generative center represented the physical body, the heart the emotional body, and the brain the mental body. The brain represented a superior sphere, But after the initiates had passed through the lower degrees, they were instructed that the brain was the proxy of the spiritual flame dwelling in the innermost recesses of the heart. The student of esotericism discovers ere long that the ancients often resorted to various blinds to conceal the true interpretations of their mysteries. The substitution of the brain for the heart was one of these blinds. The 3 degrees of the ancient mysteries were, with few exceptions, given in chambers which represented the 3 great centres of the human and universal bodies. If possible, the temple itself was constructed in the form of the human body. The candidate entered between the feet and received the highest degree in the point corresponding to the brain. Thus, the first degree was the material mystery, and its symbol was the generative system. It raised the candidate through the various degrees of concrete thought. The second degree was given in the chamber corresponding to the heart, but represented the middle power, which was the mental link. Here the candidate was initiated into the mysteries of abstract thought and lifted as high as the mind was capable of penetrating. He then passed into the third chamber, which, analogous to the brain, occupied the highest position in the temple, but, analogous to the heart, was of the greatest dignity. In the brain chamber, the heart mystery was given. Here the initiate, for the first time, truly comprehended the meaning of those immortal words, "As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he." As there are 7 hearts in the brain, so there are 7 brains in the heart, but this is a matter of superphysics, of which little can be said at the present time. Proclus writes on this subject in the first book of On the Theology of Plato. Indeed, Socrates, in the first Alcibiades, I'll spell that, Alcibiades, rightly observes that the soul entering into herself will behold all other things, and deity itself. For verging to her own union, and to the centre of all life, laying aside multitude, and the variety of the all-manifold powers which she contains, she ascends to the highest watchtower offerings. And as in the most holy of the mysteries, they say, that the mystics at first meet with the multiform and many-shaped genera, which are hurled forth before the gods, but on entering the temple, unmoved, and guarded by the mystic rites, they genuinely receive in their bosom, meaning heart, divine illumination, and divested of their garments, as they would say, participate of a divine nature. The same mode, as it appears to me, takes place in the speculation of wholes. For the soul, when looking at things posterior to herself, beholds the shadows and images of beings. But when she converts herself to herself, she evolves her own essence and the reasons which she contains. And at first, indeed, she only, as it were, beholds herself. But when she penetrates more profoundly into the knowledge of herself, she finds in herself both intellect and the orders of being. When, however, she proceeds into her interior recesses and into the adytum, as it were, of the soul, she perceives with her eye closed, in brackets without the aid of the lower mind, the genus of the gods and the unities of beings. For all things are in us physically, and through this we are naturally capable of knowing all things, by exciting the powers and the images of wholes which we contain. The initiates of old warned their disciples that an image is not a reality, but merely the objectification of a subjective idea. The image of gods were not designed to be objects of worship, but were to be regarded merely as emblems or reminders of invisible powers and principles. Similarly, the body of man must not be considered as the individual, but only as the house of the individual, in the same manner that the temple was the house of God. In a state of grossness and perversion, man's body is the tomb or prison of a divine principle. In a state of unfoldment and regeneration, it is the house or sanctuary of the deity by whose creative powers it was fashioned. Personality is suspended upon a thread from the nature of being, declares the secret work. Man is essentially a permanent and immortal principle. Only his bodies pass through the cycle of birth and death. The immortal is the reality. The mortal is the unreality. During each period of earth life, reality thus dwells in unreality, to be liberated from it temporarily by death and permanently by illumination. While generally regarded as polytheists, the pagans gained this reputation not because they worshipped more than one god, but rather because they personified the attributes of this god, thereby creating a pantheon of posterior deities, each manifesting a part of what the one god manifested as a whole. The various pantheons of ancient religions therefore actually represent the catalogued and personified attributes of deity. In this respect, they correspond to the hierarchies of the Hebrew Kabbalists. All the gods and goddesses of antiquity consequently have their analogies in the human body, as have also the elements, planets, and constellations, which were assigned as proper vehicles for these celestials. 4 body centers are assigned to the elements, the 7 vital organs to the planets, the 12 principal parts and members to the zodiac, the invisible parts of man's divine nature into various supramundane deities, while the hidden God was declared to manifest through the marrow in the bones. It is difficult for many to realize that they are actual universes, that their physical bodies are a visible nature through the structure of which countless waves of evolving life are unfolding their latent potentialities. Yet through man's physical body not only are a mineral, a plant, and an animal kingdom evolving, but also unknown classifications and divisions of invisible spiritual life, just as cells are infinitesimal units in the structure of man. So man is an infinitesimal unit in the structure of the universe. A theology based upon the knowledge and appreciation of these relationships is as profoundly just as it is profoundly true. Okay, I'm just going to stop there for a minute and have a drink. Any comments?
Oh. Not so much. At this point, it's intermediate in the story. Trying to comment too much. I could remind the listeners that they're listening to The New Way on Steempunk Radio, but they mostly already know that. This is Mel from his place reading The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manley.
Thank you, Lenny. Okay. As man's physical body has 5 distinct and important extremities, 2 legs, 2 arms, and a head, of which the last governs the first 4, the number 5 has been accepted as the symbol of man. By its 4 corners, the pyramid symbolizes the arms and legs, and by its apex, the head, thus indicating that one rational power controls 4 irrational corners. The hands and feet are used to represent the 4 elements, of which the 2 feet are earth and water, and the 2 hands fire and air. The brain then symbolizes the sacred 5th element, ether, which controls and unites the other 4. If the feet are placed together and the arms outspread, man then symbolizes the cross, with the rational intellect as the head, or upper limb. The fingers and toes also have special significance. The toes represent the 10 commandments of the physical law, and the fingers the 10 commandments of the spiritual law. The 4 fingers of each hand represent the 4 elements, and the 3 phalanges of each finger represent the divisions of the element, so that in each hand there are 12 parts to the fingers, which are analogous to the signs of the zodiac, whereas the 2 phalanges and the base of each thumb signify the threefold deity. The first phalange corresponds to the creative aspect, the second to the preservative aspect, and the base to the generative and destructive aspect. When the hands are brought together, the result is the 24 elders and the 6 days of creation. In symbolism, the body is divided vertically into halves, the right half being considered as light and the left half as darkness. By those unacquainted with the true meanings of light and darkness, the light half was denominated spiritual and the left half material. Light is the symbol of objectivity, darkness of subjectivity. Light is a manifestation of life and is therefore posterior to life. That which is anterior to light is darkness, in which light exists temporarily, but darkness permanently. As life precedes light, its only symbol is darkness. And darkness is considered as the veil which must eternally conceal the true nature of abstract and undifferentiated being. In ancient times, men fought with their right arms and defended the vital centres with their left arms, on which was carried the protecting shield. The right half of the body was regarded therefore as offensive and the left half defensive. For this reason also the right side of the body was considered masculine and the left side feminine. Several authorities are of the opinion that the present prevalent right-handedness of the race is the outgrowth of the custom of holding the left hand in restraint for defensive purposes. Furthermore, as the source of being is in the primal darkness which preceded light, so the spiritual nature of man is in the dark part of his being, for the heart is on the left side. Among the curious misconceptions arising from the false practice of associating darkness with evil is one by which several early nations used the right hand for all constructive labours and the left hand for only those purposes termed unclean and unfit for the sight of the gods. For the same reason, black magic was often referred to as the left-hand path, and heaven was said to be upon the right and hell upon the left. Some philosophers further declared that there were 2 methods of writing, one from left to right, which was considered the exoteric method, the other from right to left, which was considered esoteric. The exoteric writing was that which was done out or away from the heart, while the esoteric writing was that which, like the ancient Hebrew, was written toward the heart. The secret doctrine declares that every part and member of the body is epitomized in the brain, and in turn that all that is in the brain is epitomized in the heart. In symbolism, the human head is frequently used to represent intelligence and self-knowledge. As the human body in its entirety is the most perfect known product of the earth's evolution, it was employed to represent divinity, the highest appreciable state or condition. Artists attempting to portray divinity often show only a hand emerging from an impenetrable cloud. The cloud signifies the unknowable divinity concealed from man by human limitation. The hand signifies the divine activity, the only part of God which is cognizable to the lower senses. The face consists of a natural trinity. The eyes representing the spiritual power which comprehends, the nostrils representing the preservative and vivifying power, and the mouth and ears representing the material demiurgic power of the lower world. The first sphere is eternally existent and is creative. The second sphere pertains to the mystery of the creative breach, and the third sphere to the creative word. By the word of God, the material universe was fabricated, and the 7 creative powers, or vowel sounds, which had been brought into existence by the speaking of the word, became the 7 Elohim, or deities, by whose power and administration the lower world was organized. Occasionally, the deity is symbolized by an eye, an ear, a nose, or a mouth. By the first, divine awareness is signified. That's the eye. By the second, that's the ear, divine interest. By the third, the nose, divine vitality. And by the fourth, that's the mouth, divine command. The ancients did not believe that spirituality made men either righteous or rational, but rather that righteousness and rationality made men spiritual. The mysteries taught that spiritual illumination was attained only by bringing the lower nature up to a certain standard of efficiency and purity. The mysteries were therefore established for the purpose of unfolding the nature of man according to certain fixed rules, which, when faithfully followed, elevated the human consciousness to a point where it was capable of cognizing its own constitution and the true purpose of existence. This knowledge of how man's manifold constitution could be most quickly and most completely regenerated to the point of spiritual illumination constituted the secret, or esoteric, doctrine of antiquity. Certain apparently physical organs and centers are in reality the veils or sheaths of spiritual centers. What these were and how they could be unfolded was never revealed to the unregenerate, for the philosophers realized that once he understands the complete working of any system, a man may accomplish a prescribed end without being qualified to manipulate and control the effects which he has produced. For this reason, long periods of probation were imposed, so that the knowledge of how to become as the gods might remain the sole possession of the worthy. Lest that knowledge be lost, however, it was concealed in allegories and myths, which were meaningless to the profane, but self-evident to those acquainted with that theory of personal redemption, which was the foundation of philosophical theology. Christianity itself may be cited as an example. The entire New Testament is in fact an ingeniously concealed exposition of the secret processes of human regeneration. The characters so long considered as historical men and women are really the personification of certain processes which take place in the human body when man begins the task of consciously liberating himself from the bondage of ignorance and death. The garments and ornamentations supposedly worn by the gods are also keys, for in the mysteries clothing was considered as synonymous with form. The degree of spirituality or materiality of the organisms was signified by the quality, beauty, and value of the garments worn. Man's physical body was looked upon as the robe of his spiritual nature. Consequently, the more developed were his supersubstantial powers, the more glorious his apparel. Of course, clothing was originally worn for ornamentation rather than protection, and such practice still prevails among many primitive peoples. The mysteries caught that man's only lasting adornments were his virtues and worthy characteristics, that he was clothed in his own accomplishments and adorned by his attainments. Thus, the white robe was symbolic of purity, the red robe of sacrifice and love, and the blue robe of altruism and integrity. Since the body was said to be the robe of the spirit, mental or moral deformities were depicted as deformities of the body. Considering man's body as the measuring rule of the universe, the philosophers declared that all things resemble in constitution, if not in form, the human body. The Greeks, for example, declared Delphi to be the navel of the earth. For the physical planet was looked upon as a gigantic human being twisted into the form of a ball. In contradistinction to the belief of Christendom that the earth is an inanimate thing, the pagans considered not only the earth but also all the sidereal bodies as individual creatures possessing individual intelligences. They even went so far as to view the various kingdoms of nature as individual entities. The animal kingdom, for example, was looked upon as one being, a composite of all the creatures composing that kingdom. This prototypic beast was a mosaic embodiment of all animal propensities, and within its nature the entire animal world existed, as the human species exists within the constitution of the prototypic Adam. In the same manner, races, nations, tribes, religions, states, communities, and cities were viewed as composite entities, each made up of varying numbers of individual units. Every community has an individuality, which is the sum of the individual attitudes of its inhabitants. Every religion is an individual whose body is made up of an hierarchy and vast host of individual worshippers. The organisation of any religion represents its physical body, and its individual members the cell life making up this organism. Accordingly, religions, races, and communities, like individuals, pass through Shakespeare's 7 ages, for the life of man is a standard by which the perpetuity of all things is estimated. I'd like to stop there and comment, because this again is reminding me of Rupert Sheldrake's theory of morphogenesis, because if you, say for example, are christened into a Christian religion, according to that theory, that act of being christened alters your... Now I know you're going to contradict me on the right word here, Lenny, so bear with me. Frequency alters your frequency to that of the body of that religion. So the overall frequency of all the members of that religion. And so you join that morphogenic field. And so, yes. Unfortunately, I didn't understand anything you just said, Lenny. I'm sorry, but you were too robot. But I know you can't do anything about that.
Yeah, the frequencies have to do with the field size and the field shape. But yeah, if you can't hear me, the radio listeners can, and they can hear you as long as the signal maintains. So
you're clearer
hard
now.
to have discussion. Oh, good. Yeah, what I'm saying is that frequency is a matter of scale, and you get the same frequencies on different scales. And because scale is a variable, the same frequencies on different scales are relative to the whole morphology that you're interacting with. So human morphology is a collection of what, 7 billion humans. But when each of us as a single human acts with that morphology and does something different, we get a download at a different frequency.
Yes, I understand that. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I got that this time. Understood what you were meaning there. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, unfortunately, no, I'm not getting you now.
Go back to reading.
Okay, I understood that. Brilliant. Okay. Okay. According to the secret doctrine, man, through the gradual refinement of his vehicles and the ever-increasing sensitiveness resulting from that refinement, is gradually overcoming the limitations of matter and is disentangling himself from his mortal coil. When humanity has completed its physical evolution, the empty shell of materiality left behind will be used by other life waves as stepping stones to their own liberation. The trend of man's evolutionary growth is ever toward his own essential selfhood. At the point of deepest materialism, therefore, man is at the greatest distance from himself. According to the mystery teachings, not all the spiritual nature of man incarnates in matter. The spirit of man is diagrammatically shown as an equilateral triangle with one point downward. This lower point, which is 1/3 of the spiritual nature, but in comparison to the dignity of the other two is much less than 1/3, descends into the illusion of material existence for a brief space of time. That which never clothes itself is in the sheath of matter is the hermetic anthropos. I'll spell that ANTHROPOS, otherwise known as the overman, analogous to the Cyclops or guardian daemon of the Greeks, the angel of Jacob Boehme, and the oversoul of Emerson. That unity, that oversoul, within which every man's particular being is contained and made one with all other. At birth, only a 1/3 part of the divine nature of man temporarily disassociates itself from its own immortality and takes upon itself the dream of physical birth and existence, animating with its own celestial enthusiasm a vehicle composed of material elements, part of and bound to the material sphere. At death, this incarnated part awakens from the dream of physical existence and reunites itself once more with its eternal condition. This periodical descent of spirit into matter is termed the wheel of life and death, and the principles involved are treated at length by the philosophers under the subject of metempsychosis. By initiation into the mysteries and a certain process known as operative theology, this law of birth and death is transcended, and during the course of physical existence that part of the spirit which is asleep in form is awakened without the intervention of death, the inevitable initiator, and is consciously reunited with the anthropos, or the overshadowing substance of itself. This is at once the primary purpose and consummate achievement of the mysteries, that man shall become aware of and consciously be reunited with the divine source of himself without tasting of physical dissolution. Okay, so that's the end of that chapter. And we'll next go on to the Hiramic legend. Would you like to comment? I'm just going to go and get a drink because my throat is quite dry today. So I'll be back in 2 minutes.
I'm starting to see where if human scale is a variable that can be linked to quantums and always be human in nature, then by coming out as humans on any different scale, the morphology keeps us in the thinking of humans and basic setup. The scale dictates the physics and the material feel of what things are like. And so what we have is a difference in the body establishment of what is real, real, but from human scale, the morphology that we've already
Okay, I'm back. Can you hear me?
going to be something that is strange and charm. So now I seem to be back in the chat room, and so I'm not sure how any of this electronic stuff is working today, but today is another day and it's working as it works. So we are either strange or we are charming. It's going to work just like it always has worked. So this is the new way on time. We've got Mel reading from the Secret Teachings of All Ages, and I'm not even sure if the children can hear me.
I can hear you now. I can understand what you're saying now.
Oh boy. Whatever. I'm not connected to the radio. I'm not connected to the chat room.
Can you not hear me, Lenny?
I think this is going to work very, very oddly. And so now I seem to be back on the radio. Folks, if I can read my computer right, we're having some real bad network interference with the signals. And if I get my spacing right, I think that real bad interference with the signals has to do with the enemies that are on it from a few days. So whether I'm on air and you're listening to my voice, or when I'm off and you're listening to music, is just a function of whether the stream is picked up or not. Any control over whether the stream is picking up or not. So I'm going to close the show right now and reboot the whole system. Although at this point, I don't think the problem is on that end.
Well, while Lenny's not here, I'll just say, as I was reading that, I was thinking of the symbol for Earth, the downward triangle with the line more than halfway down. It explains why that is the symbol for Earth, and the opposite is the symbol of air.
Mel,
Yeah.
if I'm understanding correctly, we're not recording anymore.
No, Lenny's not in the chat room at the moment.
Okay,
We are. Sorry, we are.
God,
We're recording on my end.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mel.
So I wonder why the symbol for fire and water, because I'm picturing the hexagram in my head with the two triangles inverted, which also would constitute the symbols for air and earth. I wonder why those symbols for water and fire don't have those horizontal lines. Is that because there's an idea, for example, that both are elementals and so exist in the material and the non-material plane? I'm not sure. I'm just thinking out loud right now.
Probably put on some intermission music.
I'll have to pause the recording if you do that because of. Well, it's okay. Do it. I can always cut it out when I edit it before I upload it to YouTube.